She was just another contractor cleaning the gunship cannon, while the crew joked about giving the cleaning lady the biggest gun on base. They had no idea who she really was. But when the crew chief walked past and saw something on her shoulder, a patch that should not exist, everything changed. One glimpse at that symbol, and he realized the woman they had been mocking was not who she claimed to be. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about unsung heroes, consider subscribing. What happened next would force an entire Air Force base to face the truth about the quiet woman they had overlooked. The sun climbed over forward operating base Sentinel with the slow indifference of another scorching day in the desert. Heat shimmer rose from the tarmac, where 3 AC-130 gunships sat in formation, their gray hulls streaked with dust and exhaust stains. It was the third Wednesday of the month, which meant Weapons Maintenance Day, a ritual that brought groans from seasoned airmen and fresh anxiety to younger crew members still learning the difference between acceptable and dangerous. Technical Sergeant Bridger Ullman stood near the open hangar door, clipboard in hand, sweat already darkening the collar of his uniform. His voice carried across the flight line as he read off assignments to the assembled maintenance crew. Hydraulics team would inspect the landing gear assemblies. Avionics would run diagnostics on the targeting computers. The gun's crew drew the 40mm Bofors cannon, a task that involved climbing into cramped spaces and scrubbing carbon buildup from firing chambers that could fit a grown man's fist. Then Ullman paused, staring at his clipboard with visible irritation. He looked up at the crew, then back down at the paper, as if willing the words to change. The 105mm howitzer still needed cleaning. The massive artillery cannon mounted in the belly of the AC-130 was the kind of job that separated the dedicated from the resentful. It meant hours in the suffocating heat of the cargo bay, crawling around a weapon system that weighed more than a small car, dealing with powder residue and mechanical components most people never wanted to touch. Ullman scanned the faces in front of him. Every single airman suddenly found something fascinating about their boots or the distant horizon. He sighed, the sound of a man who had fought this battle before and knew he would fight it again. His eyes settled on a woman standing near the back of the group, apart from the others, not by choice, but by habit. She wore a faded contractor uniform, the kind issued to civilian maintenance personnel who handled the unglamorous work that kept military operations running. Rena Locke. That was the name on her badge. Late 30s, lean in a way that suggested physical work rather than gym routines. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical knot. Her face carried the kind of weathering that came from years under harsh sun, and her eyes, pale gray and steady, watched Ullman without expectation or complaint. "Locke," Ullman said, "you are on the 105. She nodded once. No protest, no hesitation. Just a simple acknowledgement that she had heard and understood. She bent down, picked up a dented metal cleaning kit that looked like it had survived 2 wars, and started walking toward the nearest gunship. Her stride was efficient, economical, the walk of someone who had covered a lot of ground in her life and did not waste energy on unnecessary movement. Airman First Class Gentry Cobb, a kid barely old enough to buy beer, grinned and elbowed the man next to him. "Cleaning lady gets the big gun," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "That is fitting." Laughter rippled through the crew. Not cruel exactly, but thoughtless in the way young people are thoughtless when they believe the world has already sorted itself into categories that make sense. Contractors like Locke were part of the landscape, as unremarkable as the equipment they maintained. She did not react to the comment. She did not even glance back. She just kept walking, the cleaning kit swinging gently at her side. Staff Sergeant Dallin Rhett, a weapons specialist with a decade of service, watched her go with mild amusement. "Think she even knows what that thing does?" he asked nobody in particular. "Probably thinks it is a fancy trash compactor," Cobb replied, and the laughter came again, a little louder this time. Senior Airman Vera Solene stood near the edge of the group, her expression neutral. She was younger than Rhett, but older than Cobb, caught in that middle ground where you started to notice things that did not quite fit. She had seen Locke around the base for a few months now. The woman rarely spoke, rarely ate in the common areas, and never joined the other contractors for their smoke breaks or idle complaints about the heat. Solene had assumed Locke was just antisocial, one of those people who preferred isolation to the noise of military life. But there was something else. Solene could not quite name it. The way Locke moved, maybe, too precise, too aware, like someone who was always tracking exits and angles without appearing to look. "She does not talk much," Selene said quietly. "That is because she has got nothing to say," Rhett replied, already turning his attention back to his own assignment. Inside the cargo bay of the AC-130, the heat was immediate and oppressive. The metal hull trapped the sun's energy and radiated it inward, turning the space into an oven. The 105mm howitzer dominated the interior, a beast of steel and engineering that looked brutal even at rest. Its barrel extended through a port in the aircraft's side, angled downward for ground attack missions. The breech mechanism, the firing controls, the loading system, all of it was designed for one purpose: to deliver massive explosive rounds onto targets miles below while the gunship circled in the dark. Rena Locke set her cleaning kit down and stood, for a moment, just looking at the cannon. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted, a settling, as if she had stepped into a space where she belonged. She pulled on a pair of worn work gloves and opened the kit, revealing an array of brushes, solvents, rags, and tools, organized with the kind of precision that spoke to repetition and care. She started with the breech. Her hands moved in a specific rhythm, 3 taps on the housing to check for looseness, a twist of the locking mechanism to test its resistance, a pull to verify the seal. It was not the kind of thing you learned from a manual. It was the kind of thing you learned from doing it over and over until your hands remembered even when your mind did not. She muttered under her breath as she worked, her voice so low it was almost inaudible. Grid 41 Tango Zulu. Elevation 3,200. Windage 0.4 left. The words had the cadence of a prayer or a checklist, something repeated so many times it had become automatic. Her hands paused on the firing mechanism. She tilted her head, studying the alignment of the pin. Then she frowned. It was subtle, a 1/4-degree deviation that most people would never notice. But it was there, and it was wrong. A misalignment like that could cause a jam on the 3rd or 4th round, leaving the crew vulnerable in the middle of a fire mission. She reached for a small torque wrench and made the adjustment, her movements confident and exact. Outside, the crew worked in the shade whenever possible, taking breaks to guzzle water and complain about the heat. Cobb and Rhett stood near a tool cart, talking about a deployment rumor that had been circulating for weeks. Selene worked methodically on the 40mm cannon, her mind elsewhere. She kept glancing toward the gunship, where Locke had disappeared, unable to shake the feeling that something about the woman did not add up. Ullman made his rounds, checking progress and answering questions. He was a good crew chief, the kind who knew when to push and when to ease off, when to enforce standards and when to let small things slide. He had been doing this job long enough to read people, to spot trouble before it became a problem. When he reached the gunship, he climbed the ramp into the cargo bay, expecting to find Locke scrubbing away at carbon deposits or wiping down surfaces. Instead, he found her with the firing mechanism disassembled on a clean tarp, the components laid out in precise order. His stomach dropped. That mechanism required authorization to access. It required technical knowledge that contractors were not supposed to have. It required clearance that Locke, according to her file, absolutely did not possess. "Locke," he said sharply. "What the hell are you doing?" She did not flinch, did not even look up. She was inspecting a small pin under the beam of a penlight, her focus absolute. "Firing pin was misaligned," she said, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. 1/4 degree off. You would have. Had a jam by the 3rd round? Ullman blinked. That was accurate. That was the kind of thing only a trained gunner would know. He opened his mouth to ask how she could possibly know that, but she was already reassembling the mechanism, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "How did you?" he started, but she cut him off without malice. "It is in the manual," she said. She finished the reassembly, tested the pin's alignment with a gauge he had not noticed in her kit, and nodded to herself. Then she went back to cleaning, as if disassembling a classified weapon system was no more remarkable than sweeping a floor. Ullman backed out of the cargo bay slowly, his mind racing. He had supervised hundreds of maintenance jobs. He knew what contractor work looked like. This was not that. This was something else entirely. He walked back to his desk in the hangar, pulled out his tablet, and opened Locke's personnel file. It was thin, painfully thin. Name, date of birth, contractor ID number. No prior military service listed. No security clearance history. Employment dates showed she had started working at FOB Sentinel 3 months ago. Before that, nothing. A gap from 2019 to 2023 with no explanation, no jobs listed, no addresses, just blank space where a life should have been. Ullman stared at the screen, uneasy crawling up his spine. He had seen scrubbed records before, usually tied to intelligence work or classified assignments. But those files had markers, hints that something had been redacted for operational security. Locke's file did not even have that. It was as if someone had taken an eraser to 4 years of her existence and left nothing behind. He found Selene near the water station, her uniform dark with sweat. "Run a background check on Locke," he said quietly. "Full workup. I want to know where she came from." Selene frowned. "She screwed something up, Sergeant." "Just do it," Ullman replied. 20 minutes later, Selene returned with Rhett in tow. Both of them looked confused. "Her records are weird," Rhett said, keeping his voice low, "like deliberately scrubbed. I can see she exists, but everything before 2023 is redacted, not missing." "Redacted? Redacted by who?" Ullman asked. "AFSOC," Rhett said, "Air Force Special Operations Command." The three of them stood in silence, the implications sinking in. AFSOC did not redact contractor files. AFSOC redacted files for people who had done things the Air Force did not want anyone to know about. Missions that never appeared in official records. Operations that existed only in classified briefings and the memories of the people who had been there. "I am calling the commander," Ullman said. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had climbed past 110 degrees. The crew was miserable, rotating through assignments in short shifts to avoid heat exhaustion. Locke had been inside the gunship for 6 hours straight. Ullman climbed the ramp again, this time more cautious. He found her still, working drenched in sweat, her face flushed from the heat. The cannon gleamed, cleaner than he had ever seen it. "Locke," he said gently, "take a break. You are going to pass out in here." She paused, reaching for her water bottle. "Almost done," she said. "You have been at this for 6 hours straight." She drank slowly, then set the bottle down and reached for her jacket. The cargo bay was an inferno, and she peeled the heavy fabric off her shoulders, revealing a black tank top underneath. That was when Ullman saw it. On her left shoulder, just below the curve of her deltoid, was a tattoo. Small, faded by time and sun, but unmistakable. A death's head moth with crosshairs drawn through its wings, rendered in black ink with just enough detail to be recognizable. It was not the kind of tattoo you got on a whim. It was a symbol, a mark of belonging. Ullman had seen that moth once before, 5 years ago, during a classified briefing at Bagram Airfield. A slide had appeared on screen for less than 10 seconds, showing an insignia tied to a unit that officially did not exist. A fire control team that supported special operations missions, working aboard AC-130 gunships during operations so sensitive they were never logged, never documented, never acknowledged. The Night Reapers. "Where did you get that?" Ullman asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Locke's entire body tensed. She pulled her jacket back on, but it was too late. He had seen it. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he had met her, there was something other than calm in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, just a quiet resignation. "Does not matter," she said. "The hell it does not," Ullman replied, his voice rising despite himself. "That is a—" He stopped, realizing he was about to say something he was not cleared to say. "Something you are not cleared to ask about," Locke finished for him, her tone flat. She turned back to the cannon, but Ullman did not leave. He stood there, staring at her, trying to reconcile the quiet contractor with the implications of that tattoo. If she had been part of that unit, if she had flown the missions he suspected she had flown, then everything about her presence here was wrong. People like that did not end up cleaning cannons on forward operating bases. They did not fade into anonymity. They did not exist in the gray space between military and civilian life. Unless something had happened, unless they had been erased. "I need you to come with me," Ullman said finally. "I am not done," Locke replied. "Yes, you are. Commander wants to see you." She set down her cleaning rag slowly, her movements deliberate. Then she stood, wiped her hands on her pants, and followed him out of the cargo bay without another word. The crew watched as they walked across the flight line, Whispers started immediately, spreading through the maintenance teams like wildfire. Cobb stopped mid-sentence, staring. Rhett exchanged a glance with Solène, who looked as confused as everyone else. Something was happening, something that went beyond routine maintenance and contractor oversight. As they walked, Ullman could not keep the questions bottled up any longer. "That tattoo," he said quietly. "I know what it is." Locke said nothing. "You were with the Night Reapers, were not you?" Silence. "That unit does not exist. Officially." "Then you should not know about it," Locke said, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the wind. "I was stationed at Bagram in 2021, Ullman continued. "I saw the AC-130s come back from missions with no flight logs, no records, just ghost runs. And there were rumors about a fire control team that worked those runs, a team that was not on any roster." Locke stopped walking. She turned to face him, and for the first time she looked directly into his eyes. The weight of that gaze hit him like a physical thing. There was no anger in it, no defiance, just a deep, bone-tired exhaustion. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "I want you to tell me the truth." She stared at him for a long moment, and Ullman had the sense that she was making a decision, weighing something he could not see. Then, in a voice that was cold and precise, she spoke. "Grid coordinates, 3452 north, thus 69.18 east. Call sign, Reaper 6. Mission date, October 14th, 2021. Altitude, 18,000 feet. Target, Taliban convoy, 12 vehicles, high-value asset in Vehicle 4. Ullman felt the blood drain from his face. Those were real coordinates, real details. The kind of information that did not appear in any public record. "First round," Locke continued, her voice steady and detached. 105 millimeters high explosive, direct hit. Second round, adjusted for wind, 3.2 knots southwest. Third round, mission complete. 37 confirmed kills, 0 collateral damage, 0 friendly casualties. Ullman could barely breathe. That mission was classified. Only 5 people were supposed to know those details. He had been briefed on it once, years ago, in a room with no windows and guards at the door. It had been a textbook operation. Flawless execution under impossible conditions. The fire control officer on that mission had been legendary, hitting targets with surgical precision while the gunship took evasive action under surface-to-air missile threat. "That mission was classified," Ullman whispered. Only 5 people were supposed to know those details. Locke's expression did not change. "I was number 6. If you have ever worked beside someone and never truly saw them, share your story in the comments. And if you want to hear what happened when the base commander arrived, make sure you are subscribed, because what comes next changes everything." The walk to the base commander's office felt longer than it should have. Rena Locke moved with the same steady pace she had maintained all day, but Ullman could see the tension in her shoulders now, a tightness that had not been there before. The crew they passed stopped what they were doing to watch. Word traveled fast on a base this size, and by now, everyone knew something unusual was happening. The quiet contractor who cleaned the cannons was being escorted to see Colonel Tenway, and that only happened when someone had either done something exceptional or something catastrophically wrong. The administrative building offered no relief from the heat. The air conditioning had been fighting a losing battle against the desert sun for years, and the interior felt only marginally cooler than outside. Ullman knocked on the commander's door, heard the curt response from within, and pushed it open. Colonel Idris Tenway sat behind a desk covered in reports and tablet screens, his uniform crisp despite the heat. He was in his mid-50s, with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that revealed nothing unless he wanted it to. 2 armed security personnel stood near the walls, their presence unusual enough to make Ullman's stomach tighten. Tenway looked up as they entered. His eyes moved from Ullman to Locke, and something flickered across his expression. Recognition, maybe, or something more complicated. "Staff Sergeant Ullman," he said, "you pulled a classified personnel file without authorization." "Sir, Ullman began, but Tenway raised a hand. "I am not asking for an explanation. I am confirming you did." Ullman swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." Tenway's gaze shifted to Locke, and his entire demeanor changed. The bureaucratic edge softened, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "Rena Locke," he said, and the way he said her name carried weight. "Colonel," Locke replied, her voice neutral, You know I have to report this. I know. You also know you should not be here. On this base, near these aircraft. I know that too. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Tenway leaned back in his chair, studying her. So why are you? Locke did not answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who had worked with machinery and weapons for years. Because it is the only place I still know how to be, she said quietly. Tenway nodded slowly, as if that answer made perfect sense to him. Wait outside, Ullman, he said. Sir, Ullman started. That is an order, Sergeant. Ullman hesitated, then snapped to attention, saluted, and left the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving him standing in the hallway with more questions than he had started with. He could hear muffled voices through the door, but could not make out the words. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, running through every possible scenario in his mind, and finding none of them adequate. Inside the office, Tenway gestured for Locke to sit. She did, perching on the edge of the chair, as if ready to stand at any moment. The colonel opened a file on his tablet, scrolled through it briefly, then set the device down. How long have you been back? He asked. 3 months, Locke replied. And you chose facilities maintenance. Nobody asks questions. Nobody looks twice. I can be near the gunships. Without, she trailed off. Without having to explain, Tenway finished for her. She nodded. Tenway leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. I read your file. What was not redacted anyway. There is not much left. No, there is not. He paused. Operation Phantom Scythe, Kandahar, October 2022. Locke went rigid, her jaw clenching. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair. Your gunship took fire, Tenway continued, his voice quiet but relentless. Pilot killed, co-pilot wounded, fire in the cargo bay. You stayed on your gun for 47 minutes, alone, while a SEAL team was pinned below. They needed cover, Locke said, her voice barely audible. You kept firing until backup arrived. Then you manually landed a burning AC-130 with 0 pilot training. The co-pilot talked me through it. He was unconscious. He woke up long enough to tell me where the runway was. Tenway shook his head slowly, a gesture that might have been disbelief or admiration. 16 lives saved that night. And they gave you a handshake and a discharge. The mission never happened, Locke said flatly. So, I could not have saved anyone. That is the part that eats at you, is not it? Not that you did not get the medal, but that no one can ever know what you did. Locke looked away, staring at the wall. I did not do it for recognition. I know. But you still deserved it. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the flight line, where the gunship sat baking in the sun. I am not going to report this, he said finally. But I cannot keep you here as a contractor, not after this. I understand, Locke said. However, Tenway turned back to face her. There is a training squadron at Hurlburt Field. They need instructors. People who have actually pulled the trigger in combat. I cannot teach, sir. Why not? Because I cannot talk about the missions that made me good at this. Tenway considered this, then nodded. Fair point. He returned to his desk. Then what do you want, Locke? I want to finish cleaning that cannon. Outside in the hallway, Ullman had been joined by Selene and Rhett. The three of them stood in awkward silence, waiting. Other personnel passed by, glancing at them with curiosity. The door finally opened, and Tenway emerged first, followed by Locke. The change in her was subtle but noticeable. She looked older somehow, as if the conversation had drained something from her. Tenway surveyed the three airmen. Some of you have questions, he said. I am sure Staff Sergeant Ullman has been sharing theories. Ullman shifted uncomfortably. I cannot answer those questions, and neither can Staff Sergeant Locke. But what I can tell you is this. You have been working alongside someone who flew more combat missions than most of you will ever see. Someone who earned the right to wear that uniform, even if she does not anymore. He looked at Locke, and something unspoken passed between them. And if she wants to clean a cannon, you let her clean the cannon. Clear. Yes, sir, they replied in unison. Tenway nodded once, then walked down the hallway, leaving them standing there. The crew stared at Locke, who looked profoundly uncomfortable with the attention. She started to walk away, but Selene stepped forward, blocking her path. I am sorry, Selene said. Locke frowned. For what? For not seeing you? There was a long pause. Locke's throat worked, as if she wanted to say something but could not find the words. "You did not need to see me," she said finally. "That firing pin. I would have missed it. And if we had gone up with that misalignment," Solène continued, "you would have figured it out." "No, I would not have." Solène straightened. "Thank you, Gunner." The title hit Locke like a physical blow. Her eyes glistened just for a moment before she blinked the moisture away. She nodded once, then moved past Solène and headed toward the exit. The other two watched her go, and Rhett pulled out his tablet. "I found something," he said quietly. He showed them a Department of Defense commendation list from 2022. Most of the entries were standard: names, ranks, medals awarded. But one entry stood out: Fire Control Officer, AC-130U, Operation Redacted, Silver Star recommended, denied due to operational security. Recipient discharged with honors. "You think that is her?" Solène asked. "I know it is," Rhett replied. "What do we do?" Rhett looked toward the exit where Locke had disappeared. "We make sure she knows we see her now." The rest of the day passed in a strange fog. The crew finished their assignments, but the mood had shifted. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Cobb, who had made the joke about the cleaning lady, looked sick to his stomach. He cornered Ullman near the tool crib as the sun began its descent. "Sergeant, I need to apologize for what I said this morning." Ullman studied the young airman. "Not to me," he said. "To her." Cobb nodded miserably. "Do you think she heard me? I think she has heard worse." That night, after most of the crew had returned to their quarters, Locke remained in the gunship. She worked alone in the cargo bay, the only light coming from a small LED lantern she had brought. The 105mm cannon gleamed, every surface cleaned and inspected. She sat on the deck beside it, her back against the hull, staring at the weapon. For the first time in hours, she let herself remember. The memories came in fragments: fire blooming in the cargo bay, alarms screaming through her headset, the voice of the pilot, calm even as the aircraft shuddered from the impact. "Reaper 6, we are taking fire." RPG hit starboard side, the co-pilot's voice cutting in, tighter, more urgent. "Lost hydraulics, primary flight controls not responding." She remembered the heat, the smoke, the way her hands had moved on the firing controls with a steadiness that surprised even her. The targeting computer had been damaged, so she had done the calculations in her head. Wind speed, altitude, target movement, 37 enemies on the ground, 16 friendlies counting. On her to keep the bad guys pinned until extraction arrived. First round away. The cannon's roar filled the world. Adjust. Second round. The rhythm became everything. Load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire. She had lost track of time, operating on instinct and training, her body moving through the smoke like it belonged there. Then the voice of the SEAL team leader on the ground, broken by static. "Reaper 6, you are keeping us alive. Do not stop. Do not stop." She had not stopped. Not when the fire spread. Not when the co-pilot slumped unconscious in his seat. Not when the backup gunship finally arrived and took over fire support. She had stayed on the gun until the last friendly was on the helicopter, until the enemy fire ceased, until there was nothing left to do but try to bring the crippled aircraft home. Landing it had been the hardest part. She had never trained as a pilot. She had watched them work, absorbed their procedures through proximity and necessity, but she had never touched the controls. The co-pilot had regained consciousness just long enough to talk her through the approach, his voice fading in and out. 30 degrees flaps. Ease the throttle. Keep your nose up. Then he had passed out again, and she had been alone with a dying aircraft and a runway that looked impossibly small. Somehow, she had made it. The landing gear had collapsed on impact, and the aircraft had skidded for what felt like miles. But everyone had walked away. 16 SEALs, the wounded co-pilot, her. 3 days later, they had told her the mission never happened. The operation was too sensitive, the implications too classified. There would be no medal, no commendation, no record that she had been there at all, just a quiet discharge and a recommendation that she disappear. So she had. Locke wiped her eyes, surprised to find them wet. She had not cried in years. She stood, picking up her lantern, and made her way toward the ramp. That was when she saw Ullman standing at the base of it, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Figured you could use this," he said, holding one out. She took it, nodded her thanks, and they stood there in silence for a moment. The base was quiet around them, just the distant hum of generators and the occasional voice carrying across the tarmac. "I should not have pushed," Ullman said finally. "You did your job." "No, I was curious, and I made it about me." He paused. "For what it is worth, I have been doing this for 15 years. I have worked with a lot of gunners. You are the best I have ever seen." Locke's voice was barely a whisper. "I used to be. You still are." He set his coffee down and climbed back down the ramp, leaving her alone. She stood there holding the cup, feeling its warmth seep into her hands. Then, so quietly that no one else could have heard, she whispered to the darkness. Reaper 6, mission complete. The next morning arrived with the same brutal heat, but the atmosphere on the flight line had changed. Locke showed up at her usual time, but instead of heading straight to the gunship, she found the entire maintenance crew gathered near it. They were silent, waiting. She approached slowly, confused, and then she saw what they were looking at. Someone had spray-painted words on the side of the AC-130, just below the cockpit windows. The letters were uneven, clearly done in haste, but they were legible, cleaned by the best gunner in the Air Force. Locke stopped walking. She stared at the words, unable to process what she was seeing. Solène stepped forward. "We thought you should know," she said. "That firing pin you fixed. Cannon fired perfectly yesterday. No jams." Rhett moved up beside her. "And I am sorry. For the jokes. I did not know." "You were not supposed to," Locke said, her voice thick. "But we do now," Solène replied. The crew stood at attention, not because they had been ordered to, not because protocol demanded it, but because they wanted to. Cobb, who had made the joke that started everything, looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. Locke looked at them, overwhelmed by the gesture, and opened her mouth to say something. Then 3 vehicles pulled up, their tires crunching on the gravel. The crew's eyes went wide. Colonel Tenway stepped out of the first vehicle, followed by 2 officers in dress uniforms. The insignia on their shoulders marked them as general officers. A protocol officer emerged from the second vehicle, carrying a locked case. Rhett leaned towards Solène. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. "Staff Sergeant Rena Locke," one of the generals called out. His voice carried authority and something else. Respect. Locke straightened instinctively, old training taking over. "Sir," the general approached. He was in his early 60s with a chest full of ribbons and a distinguished flying cross among them. "I am Major General Carrick Desai, Air Force Special Operations Command. I have been tracking your situation." "Sir, I am no longer active duty," Locke started. "I know. And that is a problem." He nodded to the protocol officer, who stepped forward and opened the case. Inside, resting on blue velvet, was a silver star medal. The crew gasped. Ullman felt his knees go weak. Locke stared at the medal as if it might vanish if she looked away. "On October 18th, 2022, Desai said," his voice formal now, "during Operation Phantom Scythe, you performed actions that warranted this decoration. However, due to operational security, the award was classified and subsequently denied." Locke's hands trembled at her sides. "That decision has been overturned. As of 0600 this morning, Operation Phantom Scythe has been partially declassified. Your service record has been restored." He lifted the medal from the case. "Staff Sergeant Rena Locke, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States, while serving as fire control officer aboard an AC-130U gunship, you are hereby awarded the Silver Star." He stepped forward and pinned the medal to her. Contractor jacket, the only uniform she had. The medal gleamed in the morning sun. "You saved 16 lives that night, Gunner. They all know who you are, and now so does everyone else." Locke's vision blurred. She could not speak, could not move, could only stand there as the weight of the medal pressed against her chest. General Desai stepped back. Then, slowly and deliberately, he came to attention. His hand rose in a sharp, perfect salute. "It is an honor, Gunner." Colonel Tenway saluted. Then Ullman. Then, one by one, every member of the crew snapped to attention and raised their hands. Cobb's salute was shaky, his face wet with tears. Rhett stood ramrod straight, his jaw clenched. Solène's eyes were bright as she held her salute with absolute precision. Locke stood frozen, surrounded by saluting airmen, and for the first time in years, she felt seen. She raised her own hand, her fingers trembling, and returned the salute. Tears streamed down her face, and she did not try to hide them. If someone you know carries the weight of invisible sacrifice, honor them in the comments below. And if this story moved you, subscribe to hear how Rena found peace in the place she thought she had lost. Because the final part will show you what true redemption looks like. The generals departed within the hour, their vehicles kicking up dust as they left the flight line. The protocol officer had saluted one final time before climbing into the lead vehicle, and then they were gone, leaving behind a crew that stood in stunned silence. Rena Locke remained where she was, the silver star pinned to her faded contractor jacket, her face still wet with tears she had not bothered to wipe away. The crew began to disperse slowly, returning to their duties with a kind of reverence that had not existed the day before. They moved quietly, stealing glances at her as if afraid she might vanish if they looked too long. The weight of the metal against her chest felt foreign. She had worn combat gear that weighed 50 pounds without noticing, had operated weapon systems under fire with steady hands, had made split-second calculations that meant the difference between life and death. But this small piece of metal, shaped like a star and hung from a ribbon, carried a weight that had nothing to do with physics. It was the weight of recognition, of validation, of a truth finally acknowledged after years of silence. Ullman approached carefully, his hands in his pockets, his usual confidence replaced by something more tentative. "You okay?" he asked. Locke did not answer immediately. She touched the metal with one finger, tracing the star's edges as if confirming it was real. The metal was cool despite the heat, smooth and precisely manufactured. "I do not know," she said finally. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rougher than usual. "It is a lot," Ullman said. "I did not want this. I just wanted to." She gestured vaguely at the gunship behind her, the cannon visible through the open cargo bay. The words failed her, but Ullman seemed to understand. "I know," he said. He paused, searching for the right words. "What are you going to do now?" "Finish the job." She picked up her cleaning rag from where she had left it and climbed back into the gunship. Her legs felt heavy as she ascended the ramp, as if her body was finally acknowledging the exhaustion she had been pushing aside. Inside the cargo bay, the 105mm cannon waited, half-cleaned, exactly as she had left it. The familiar smell of gun oil and metal filled her nostrils, grounding her. This she understood. This made sense. Ullman watched her go, shaking his head slowly, and turned to find Selene and Rhett standing nearby. They had witnessed everything, and their faces showed a mixture of awe and confusion. "She just got a silver star," Selene said quietly. "And she is going back to clean the cannon." "That is who she is," Ullman replied. "That is why she deserved it." The three of them stood there for a moment longer, watching the open cargo bay where Locke had disappeared. Then Ullman cleared his throat and checked his clipboard. "We have got other aircraft that need attention," he said. "Let us get back to work." But none of them moved immediately. The moment felt too significant to simply walk away from, as if doing so would somehow diminish what had just happened. Finally, Rhett spoke up. "Sergeant, what do we do now? I mean, with her. Do we treat her different?" Ullman considered the question. "We treat her with the respect she has always deserved," he said. "We do not make it weird. We do not turn her into some kind of mascot or legend we can point to. We just see her, really see her, and we do our jobs better because she showed us how." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The story spread through the base like wildfire, carried by airmen who had witnessed the ceremony and by those who had heard about it secondhand. By evening, everyone from the mess hall staff to the supply depot had heard some version of what had happened. Some of the details were accurate. Others had been embellished in the retelling, the way stories always are when they pass from person to person. But the core remained true. The quiet contractor they had ignored for months was a decorated combat veteran who had saved lives in a classified operation no one was supposed to know about. In the mess hall that night, conversations were subdued. Groups of airmen sat hunched over their trays, speaking in low voices. The usual banter and jokes were absent, replaced by a more thoughtful atmosphere. Several people had tried to approach Locke when she came in for dinner, but she had taken her tray to a corner table and eaten alone, her body language clearly stating that she did not want company. Most people respected that, though a few brave souls nodded to her as they passed, and she nodded back, a small acknowledgement that something had shifted. Cobb sat with a group of younger airmen, pushing his food around his tray without eating. One of his friends, an airman named Decker, who worked in communications, leaned forward. "I heard you made some joke about her this morning," Decker said, before all this went down. Cobb's face flushed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I called her the cleaning lady. Said it was fitting she got the big gun." Decker winced. "That is rough, man." "I feel sick about it," Cobb admitted. "I had no idea. None of us did." "That is not really an excuse, though, is it?" another airman said. "Her name was Portia, and she worked in aircraft maintenance on a different crew. I mean, contractor or not, you should not mock people for doing their job." Cobb nodded miserably. "I know, I just thought," he trailed off. "I do not even know what I thought. That she did not matter, I guess. That she was just background." "And now you know better," Portia said, not unkindly. "So, what are you going to do about it?" "I do not know. Apologize, I guess. That is a start." Locke worked through it all, ignoring the whispers and the stares. She finished cleaning the 105mm cannon with the same meticulous care she had shown from the beginning. Every surface was inspected. Every component was tested. The work became meditative, a rhythm that allowed her mind to process everything that had happened. Her hands moved automatically, following patterns established through years of repetition, while her thoughts churned. She thought about the 16 men she had saved. She wondered where they were now, whether they had families, whether they still thought about that night in Kandahar. She wondered if they knew her name, or if she had just been a voice on the radio, disembodied and anonymous. The mission had been classified, the details sealed away, but the men who had been there knew what had happened. They had lived it. She thought about the years she had spent in limbo, neither military nor truly civilian, existing in a gray space where her past could not be acknowledged and her future felt uncertain. She had taken the contractor job because it was the only way she could think of to stay close to the world she understood. The civilian job she had tried after her discharge had felt hollow, meaningless. She had lasted 3 weeks as a warehouse manager before walking out in the middle of a shift, unable to bear another moment of inventory counts and shipping schedules. She thought about the letter from General Desai, still tucked in her pocket, offering her a way forward, a real position, real recognition, the chance to teach others what she had learned. When she finally climbed out of the cargo bay as the sun began to set, the weapon gleamed like new. Every inch of the barrel caught the fading light. The firing mechanism moved with perfect smoothness. The loading system had been tested and retested until she was certain it would function flawlessly. She found Ullman waiting at the base of the ramp, as if he had known she would emerge at this exact moment. "Inspection," he said simply. She stepped aside, and he climbed into the cargo bay with a checklist and a flashlight. She watched from below as his light played across the surfaces she had just cleaned, checking her work against the technical manual. The inspection took longer than usual. Ullman was being thorough, perhaps more thorough than necessary. But she did not mind. She appreciated precision, appreciated someone who took the work seriously. When he emerged 20 minutes later, he was shaking his head, but there was a smile on his face. "Perfect," he said. "Not good. Perfect. I have never seen a cleaner job on a 105. I mean it. This thing looks better than it did when it rolled out of the factory." Locke nodded, accepting the compliment without fanfare. "Good," she said. Ullman hesitated, then pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "This came for you," he said. "Came through official channels about an hour ago." She took the envelope, frowning. It was addressed to Staff Sergeant Rena Locke, and the return address was Air Force Special Operations Command. The paper was heavy, official, the kind used for important correspondence. She opened it carefully and pulled out a single sheet. It was a letter, brief and formal, typed on letterhead that carried the weight of authority. It informed her that her military service record had been fully restored, that she was eligible for veteran benefits she had been denied, and that a position was being held for her at the training squadron at Hurlburt Field in Florida if she chose to accept it. The letter detailed the position. She would be a senior instructor for AC-130 weapons systems, responsible for training new gunners and fire control officers. The pay was listed, along with benefits and the opportunity for advancement. It was everything she could have hoped for, a path back into the world she had been forced to leave. At the bottom, handwritten in pen, was a single line. "You do not have to hide anymore. Locke read the line 3 times, her eyes tracing each word as if memorizing them. The handwriting was strong and clear, the letters formed with care. She could picture General Desai sitting at his desk, adding this personal note to an otherwise formal document. The gesture meant something. It meant he understood what she had been through, what it had cost her to disappear. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. She looked at Ullman. "Thank you for not letting this go," she said. "I did not do anything," Ullman replied. "You asked the right questions. You pushed when you could have just let it slide." He smiled, a genuine expression that softened his usually stern features. "That is part of the job," he said, "taking care of the people in my crew, even the ones I did not know needed taking care of." She walked back toward the contractor quarters as the base settled into evening routines. The air was cooler now, the heat finally breaking as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, beautiful in a way that the harsh daylight never was. She passed groups of airmen heading to the mess hall or the rec center, and several of them nodded respectfully as she went by. Some even saluted, though she was no longer in uniform and the gesture was not required. It was a strange feeling, being seen after so long in the shadows. Part of her wanted to retreat, to find some corner where she could be invisible again. The attention made her uncomfortable, made her feel exposed in a way that combat never had. In combat, there had been a clarity of purpose, a singular focus that left no room for self-consciousness. But here, with people looking at her with admiration and respect, she felt uncertain, as if she might somehow fail to live up to their expectations. But another part of her, a part she had thought was dead, felt something close to relief. For so long, she had carried the weight of her experiences alone, unable to share them, unable to even acknowledge they had happened. Now, with her service record restored and her actions recognized, that weight felt lighter, not gone, but distributed differently, as if others were finally helping her carry it. That night, she sat on the edge of her bunk in the contractor quarters and stared at the silver star. She had taken it off her jacket and placed it on the small table beside her bed, where she could look at it without wearing it. Under the harsh fluorescent light, it looked almost surreal, like something from a dream or a movie rather than her actual life. The star's 5 points were perfectly symmetrical, the ribbons striped in red, white, and blue. It was a beautiful object, she had to admit, designed to convey honor and sacrifice. She thought about the 16 men she had kept alive that night in Kandahar. She wondered where they were now, what they were doing at this exact moment. Were they home with their families, playing with children who would never know how close they had come to growing up without a father? Were they still in the service, flying missions, or training others? Had they moved on, built new lives, put that night behind them? She wondered if they ever thought about the voice on the radio that had refused to stop firing, that had kept the rounds coming even when the aircraft was dying around her. She wondered if they even knew her name. The question had haunted her for years. The mission had been classified at the highest levels, the details compartmentalized to the point where even the people involved often did not know the full picture. She had never met the SEALs she had saved, had never seen their faces or heard their voices, except through the distortion of radio communications. They were real to her only as call signs and map coordinates, as voices requesting fire support and confirming hits. But they had been real. They had been flesh and blood, men with families and histories and futures that depended on her doing her job perfectly. And she had done it. She had kept them alive. The next morning, Locke arrived at the flight line before dawn. The base was still quiet, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east, with that particular quality of pre-dawn gray that turned everything ghostly and indistinct. She expected to find the area deserted, as it usually was at this hour, but instead she found Solène waiting near the gunship. The young airman stood at ease, holding 2 cups of coffee, steam rising from them in the cool morning air. "Figured you would be early," Solène said, offering one of the cups. Locke took it, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you," she said. They stood in silence for a moment, sipping coffee and watching the sky change colors. The transition from night to day happened gradually here, without the drama of a true sunrise, just a slow brightening that eventually revealed the world in full detail. Locke found it peaceful, this quiet time before the base came fully to life, before the noise and activity of the day began. Finally, Solène spoke. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Locke nodded, cradling the warm cup in her hands. Why did you come back? I mean, after everything. After what they did to you. Why come back to a place like this? Locke considered the question. She had asked herself the same thing 100 times, especially during the first few weeks when the work had felt mindless and the isolation had been crushing. Because this is the only place that makes sense to me, she said. Out there, in the civilian world, I did not know who I was supposed to be. I could not talk about what I had done, could not explain the things that mattered. Every conversation felt like a minefield, full of topics I had to avoid and questions I could not answer. She paused, gathering her thoughts. People would ask what I did before, and I would say I worked on aircraft, which was true but incomplete. They would ask if I had been in the military, and I would have to lie because my service record did not exist anymore. I felt like a ghost, like I was not fully real. Solène listened intently, her young face serious. But here, Locke continued, gesturing at the gunship, even if no one knew who I was, I knew. I could touch the cannons and remember what they were for. I could do the work and feel like I was still part of something. The aircraft did not care about my service record or whether I was allowed to talk about my past. They just needed to be maintained, and I knew how to do that. Even if they treated you like you did not matter, Solène said quietly. Even then. Because I knew the truth, I knew what I had done and what these weapons could do when properly maintained. Every time I cleaned a cannon or inspected a firing mechanism, I was making sure that when the next crew went up, when they needed that weapon to work, it would not fail them. Locke took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. It was a small thing, she said, but it mattered to me. It was a way of still serving, still being, part of the mission, even if no one knew it. Solène nodded slowly, processing this. That makes sense, she said. She paused. Would you teach me? Locke frowned. Teach you what? How to see the things you see, like that firing pin. I have been working on these aircraft for 3 years, and I would never have caught that misalignment. I would have signed off on it, and someone could have died because of my oversight. It is just practice, Locke said. Repetition. You do it enough times, and you start to notice patterns. No, Solène said firmly. It is more than that. You look at these weapons like they are alive. Like you understand them in a way the rest of us do not. You see relationships between components that I just see as separate parts. I want to learn that. Locke studied her. The request was genuine, not born of hero worship or a desire to get close to someone who had suddenly become famous, but of a real desire to be better at the job. She could see it in Solène's eyes, the hunger to improve, to develop the kind of expertise that meant the difference between life and death. She thought about the letter in her pocket, about the offer to teach at a real training squadron with real resources and official recognition. But she also thought about this young airman standing in front of her, willing to show up before dawn just to ask for guidance, willing to admit what she did not know. Okay, Locke said, meet me here tomorrow, 0600. Solène's face lit up with a smile that transformed her serious features. Yes, ma'am, she said. Over the next week, a new rhythm established itself. Locke continued her work as a contractor, moving through her assigned tasks with the same precision and care she had always shown. But now she spent her mornings with Solène, teaching her the finer points of weapons maintenance that went beyond what the technical manuals covered. They started with the basics, the foundational knowledge that underpinned everything else. How to read the tolerances on a firing pin, Locke explained on the first morning, holding the small component up to the light. See these markings. They tell you the acceptable range of variation. But what the manual does not tell you is that even within tolerance, there are preferences. A pin that is at the high end of tolerance will wear differently than one at the low end. You want to aim for the middle, the sweet spot where everything balances. Solène took notes, her handwriting quick and efficient. How do you measure that precisely? She asked. Locke showed her the specialized gauges, explaining not just how to use them, but why they were designed the way they were. Every tool has a purpose, she said, and understanding that purpose helps you use it correctly. They moved on to identifying stress fractures in a barrel, which required both visual inspection and tactile feedback. Run your fingers along the interior surface, Locke instructed. Close your eyes. What do you feel? Solène did as instructed, her fingers moving slowly along the metal. It feels smooth mostly, she said, but there is a spot here, about halfway down. It feels different. Not rough exactly, but not quite smooth either. That is a microfracture starting to form, Locke said. Another 1,000 rounds and it would have become visible. Another 2,000 and it could have caused a catastrophic failure. You just potentially saved lives. Selene opened her eyes, looking at her fingers as if seeing them for the first time. I would have missed that if you had not told me to close my eyes, she admitted. Most people would, Locke said. We rely too much on vision, but your fingers can tell you things your eyes cannot, especially in tight spaces or poor lighting. Learn to trust all your senses. They worked on listening to the sound of mechanisms, how a properly functioning firing system had a specific acoustic signature that changed when something was wrong. Locke demonstrated by operating a loading mechanism slowly, then asked Selene to do the same. What do you hear? She asked. Metal moving against metal, Selene said. A kind of clicking sound as the parts engage. Now listen to this one, Locke said, switching to a different weapon system. What is different? Selene operated it, her face scrunched in concentration. It sounds similar, but not quite the same. There is an extra noise, like a scraping. That is the sound of a bearing starting to fail, Locke explained. The scraping is metal-on-metal contact that should not be happening. If you replace that bearing now, it is a simple fix. If you wait until it fails completely, you are looking at damage to multiple components and hours of repair work. Other crew members began to take notice of these morning sessions. Rhett started asking questions during routine maintenance, his queries more thoughtful and probing than they had been before. He had done some reading, looked up technical specifications and maintenance histories, and came to Locke with specific scenarios. What would you do if you found this combination of issues, he would ask, describing a hypothetical situation. How would you prioritize the repairs? Locke would walk him through her reasoning, explaining not just what she would do, but why. The why was always more important than the what. Anyone could follow a procedure. Understanding the underlying principles meant you could adapt when circumstances changed, when the manual did not cover your specific situation. Cobb, still working through his guilt over his earlier comments, volunteered for every difficult job and executed it with newfound diligence. He was quiet around Locke, respectful to the point of being awkward, and she eventually pulled him aside. You do not need to walk on eggshells around me, she told him. I am not angry with you. But Cobb started. You made a mistake, Locke said. You said something thoughtless. Most people do at some point. The question is what you do after. And from what I have seen, you have been doing the work and doing it well. That matters more than words. Cobb nodded, his relief visible. Thank you, ma'am. Just keep doing good work, she said. That is the best apology. Even Ullman found himself learning, watching Locke work and realizing how much he had missed over the years, despite his experience. He had been a good crew chief, thorough and knowledgeable, but Locke operated on a different level. She saw connections he had never noticed, anticipated problems before they manifested, understood the weapon systems with an intimacy that came from having depended on them in life or death situations. One afternoon, he found her inspecting a cannon that had just come back from a training mission. Everything okay? He asked. Defining okay is the issue, Locke replied without looking up. Mechanically, this weapon is within all specifications. It will pass inspection. But look at this wear pattern on the breech mechanism. She pointed to a section of metal that looked fine to Ullman's eyes. The wear is asymmetrical, she said. See how it is heavier on the left side. That means the cannon is not perfectly aligned in its mount. The difference is tiny, probably less than a degree, but over time it will cause increasing problems. Ullman leaned in closer, finally seeing what she was talking about. The manual does not mention checking for that, he said. The manual assumes perfect installation, Locke replied. But nothing in the real world is perfect. You have to look beyond what the manual tells you to look for. How did you learn to do that? Ullman asked. By having a cannon jam in the middle of a fire mission, Locke said quietly. By having people's lives depend on this weapon working and learning every possible way it could fail. The manual teaches you to maintain the weapon. Combat teaches you to understand it. The spray-painted words on the side of the gunship remained, visible to everyone who passed. No one had been ordered to remove them, and no one volunteered. They became a fixture, a reminder of the day everything had changed. Pilots taxiing past the aircraft saw them and asked questions. Maintenance crews from other squadrons heard the story and came by to see for themselves, wanting to know if it was true, if there really was a contractor who turned out to be a decorated combat veteran. Locke hated the attention, the way people stared at her or fell silent when she approached. But she tolerated it because the alternative was hiding again, retreating back into invisibility. And she had done enough of that. She had spent years in the shadows, and while part of her would always be more comfortable there, she was learning that being seen was not the worst thing in the world. 2 weeks after the ceremony, a package arrived for her. It was delivered by a courier, a young corporal, who seemed nervous as he handed it over. "This came through special channels, ma'am," he said. "I was told to make sure you received it personally." The package was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Locke signed for it and took it back to her quarters, curious but cautious. In her experience, unexpected packages were rarely good news. But when she opened it, she found a small wooden box, beautifully crafted from dark hardwood with brass hinges. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a challenge coin. The coin was custom-made, not an official military issue. On one side was the silhouette of an AC-130 gunship, rendered in fine detail with the 105mm cannon visible. On the other side, engraved in simple letters, were the words Reaper 6 and the date of the mission in Kandahar, October 18th, 2022. Tucked beneath the coin was a note on plain paper. The handwriting varied as if multiple people had contributed. From the 16, "We never forgot. Thank you, Gunner." Locke sat on her bunk and cried for the second time in as many weeks. The tears came suddenly and overwhelmingly, and she did not try to stop them. She had thought herself forgotten, erased from a mission that had never officially happened. She had assumed that the men she saved had moved on, that she had been just another voice on the radio to them, anonymous and interchangeable. But they had remembered. Somehow, despite the classification and the sealed records, they had found out her name. They had tracked her down, learned where she was, and sent her this token to tell her that her sacrifice had mattered, that they knew what she had done, that they would never forget. She held the coin in her palm, feeling its weight. It was heavier than it looked, solid and substantial. She thought about the 16 men, imagined them passing the coin around, each one handling it before it was sent to her. She wondered what they had said, what they had felt, whether they had argued about the wording or the design. She wondered if they knew that this simple gesture meant more to her than any official medal ever could. She carried the coin with her after that, a small weight in her pocket that grounded her. She would touch it sometimes during the day, feeling its smooth surfaces and raised edges, reminding herself that she had not been forgotten, that somewhere out there, 16 people carried the memory of what she had done, and that memory was real even if the official records were sealed. One evening, as the sun set and the base began to wind down for the night, Colonel Tenway found Locke near the hangar. She was inspecting a replacement part for one of the other gunships, checking its specifications against the manual with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. "Locke," he said. She looked up from her work. "Sir?" "Walk with me." They walked across the tarmac, past the rows of aircraft sitting in neat lines, their holes dark in the fading light. Tenway had his hands clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed in a way it rarely was during duty hours. "I got a call from General Desai," he said. "He wanted to know if you had made a decision about the training position." Locke did not respond immediately. She had been thinking about it constantly since receiving the letter, weighing her options with the same analytical precision she brought to weapons maintenance. The training squadron would be a real job with a real salary and benefits. She would be working with people who understood what she had been through, who had their own classified missions and sealed records. She could teach the next generation of gunners, pass on the knowledge she had earned in blood and fire, make sure they were prepared for the moments when everything depended on their skill. But it would also mean leaving this place, leaving the gunships she had come to know intimately, every quirk and characteristic, leaving Solène, who was learning so quickly and had such potential, leaving Ullman and Rhett and even Cobb, the crew that had finally learned to see her not as background or decoration, but as a person with value. "I have not decided," she said. Tenway nodded, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. "For what it is worth, I think you would be an excellent instructor. You have a gift for breaking down complex concepts and making them understandable, and you have the credibility that comes from actual combat experience. The students would respect that. He paused, watching a transport plane take off from the far end of the runway, its engines roaring in the distance. "But I also understand why you might want to stay," he continued. "Sometimes the best place for someone is not the place with the most prestige or the best benefits. Sometimes it is just the place where you can be yourself." They stopped near the edge of the flight line, looking out at the desert beyond the fence. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, but there was a strange beauty to it in this light, the way the fading sun painted the sand in shades of gold and amber. "It is not about staying," Locke said quietly. "It is about knowing where I belong." "And do you know?" Tenway asked. She thought about the question, really thought about it. A month ago, she would have said no. She had been adrift, existing rather than living, going through the motions without real purpose. But something had changed, not just the ceremony or the restored records, but something more fundamental. She had connected with people here. She had taught Selene and earned Ullman's respect and even helped Cobb work through his guilt. She had been part of something again. "I am starting to," she said. Tenway smiled, a genuine expression that softened his usually stern features. "That is progress," he said. "Whatever you decide, you will have my support. And my recommendation, if you need it. I will make sure General Desai knows that any delay in your decision is because you are carefully considering your options, not because you are ungrateful for the opportunity." "Thank you, sir," Locke said. He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the fading light. She looked at the gunships, their hulls dark against the sky, and felt the weight of the challenge coin in her pocket. She thought about the letter from Desai, the offer that represented a return to something resembling a normal military career. She thought about Solene's eager questions and Ullman's quiet respect and the way the crew no longer looked through her, but at her, really seeing her for who she was. She thought about the 16 men who had sent her a coin to say they remembered, and she realized that for the first time in years, she had a choice. Not a choice imposed by circumstance or necessity or the demands of classified operations, but a real choice about who she wanted to be and where she wanted to go. She could return to official service, put the uniform back on, teach in a structured environment with resources and support. Or she could stay here, remain technically civilian, but continue the work that had become meaningful to her. Continue teaching Selene and whoever else wanted to learn. Both options were valid, both had merit, and having that choice, having the freedom to decide her own path, was something she had not experienced in a very long time. The following week, Locke made her decision. She submitted her resignation as a contractor, effective in 30 days. The paperwork went through quickly, processed by an administration that had learned not to ask too many questions about her file. She also accepted the position at Hurlburt Field, filling out the necessary forms and coordinating with General Desai's office about her start date. On her last day at FOB Sentinel, the crew gathered near the gunship to see her off. Someone had organized it, probably Ullman, though he denied responsibility when asked. They had not made it an official ceremony, just a casual gathering of people who wanted to say goodbye. But they had clearly put thought into it. Ullman stepped forward first, holding a framed photo. "We figured you should have this," he said, "to remember us by." The photo showed the AC-130 with the spray-painted words still visible on its side, taken at sunset when the light was golden and warm. The image captured not just the aircraft, but the moment, the emotion, the significance of what had happened. Someone had gotten it professionally printed and framed, the craftsmanship evident in the matting and glass. "I am not going far," Locke said, her voice thick. "Just Florida." "Still," Ullman replied. "You should have something to remember where this all started, where people finally saw you." Selene stepped forward next, holding a small box. "We all chipped in," she said. "Thought you might need this." Inside was a new flight jacket, Air Force blue with the patches of the training squadron already sewn on. But it was the left shoulder that made Locke's breath catch. Someone had embroidered a death's head moth with crosshairs through its wings, the unofficial symbol that had been hidden, for so long, now displayed openly. The stitching was immaculate, the detail incredible, down to the individual segments of the moth's body. "You did not have to do this," Locke said. "We wanted to," Rhett said, stepping up beside Selene. "You taught us to see things we were missing. Seems only fair we help you see yourself the way we do now. Not as someone who has to hide what she is, but as someone who earned the right to wear that symbol with pride." Locke put the jacket on. It fit perfectly. Someone had clearly gotten her measurements exactly right. She looked at the crew, these people who had gone from ignoring her to honoring her in the span of a few short weeks. The transformation still felt surreal sometimes, like she might wake up and find it had all been a dream. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Cobb finally stepped forward, having been hanging back at the edge of the group. "Ma'am, I just want to say again, I am sorry. For the things I said. For not seeing you. You were not supposed to know," Locke said gently. "And you apologized, multiple times. That is enough, more than enough." He nodded, relieved but still clearly carrying some guilt. "I just hope that wherever you go, people treat you better than I did." Locke smiled, a rare expression that transformed her usually serious face. "You have been treating me fine for weeks now, Cobb, and you have been doing excellent work. Focus on that, not on one mistake you made months ago." Locke turned to address the whole group. "I came here thinking I would just clean cannons and stay invisible," she said. "I thought that was all I was good for anymore. But you all showed me something different. You showed me that I still have value, that I still have things to teach, that I still belong in this world." She paused, composing herself. "So, thank you. For seeing me when I did not think I wanted to be seen, for pushing me when I wanted to hide, for reminding me that I am more than just my past." The group stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling over them. Then Ullman extended his hand. "Take care of yourself, Gunner," he said, "and take care of the next generation. Make them as good as you are." "I will try," Locke said, shaking his hand firmly. She walked to her car, the beat-up sedan she had bought, used when she first arrived at the base. As she loaded her few belongings into the trunk, she took one last look at the flight line. The gunships sat in their usual places, patient and powerful, waiting for their next mission. The spray-painted words on the side of her gunship caught the afternoon light, still visible despite weeks of sun and wind. Solène jogged up as Locke was about to get in the car. "Wait," she called out, slightly out of breath. Locke paused, one hand on the door. "I just wanted to say," Solène started, then stopped, searching for words. "You changed the way I see this job, the way I see what it means to serve. Before, it was just maintenance, just keeping equipment running. But you showed me that every adjustment we make, every inspection we do, it matters because people's lives depend on it. So, thank you for that." Locke felt her throat tighten. "You are going to be a hell of a gunner someday, Solène," she said. "You have got the instinct for it, the curiosity, the willingness to learn. Just keep asking questions and trust what you feel when you are working on the weapons." "I will," Solène promised. "And maybe someday I will get to Florida and you can teach me more." "I would like that," Locke said, and meant it. She climbed into the car and started the engine. Through the windshield, she could see the crew still gathered near the gunship, watching her go. She raised a hand in farewell, and they waved back. Then she put the car in gear and drove toward the gate, toward the future that waited beyond the fence. 3 months later, at Hurlburt Field in Florida, Staff Sergeant Rena Locke stood in front of a classroom full of young airmen. They were fresh from basic training, eager and nervous in equal measure, with no idea what real combat would demand of them. The classroom was modern, equipped with computers and projection screens, a far cry from the dusty cargo bays where she had learned her craft. But the fundamentals were the same: metal and fire, precision and consequences. She wore her new uniform with the Silver Star ribbon above her left pocket and the Death's Head moth patch on her shoulder. The students stared at her with the kind of awe reserved for people who had done things they could only imagine. She could see them trying to reconcile her appearance, a woman in her late 30s who looked more weathered than her age suggested, with the stories they had heard about the classified missions and the impossible landing. "Today," she said, her voice calm and steady, "we are going to talk about the 105mm howitzer, not just how to clean it, not just how to load it, but how to understand it, how to know when something is wrong before it becomes a problem, how to make sure that when you pull the trigger, the round goes exactly where it needs to go." She walked to the front of the classroom, where a disassembled firing mechanism sat on a table, its components laid out in precise order. "This is not just a weapon," she continued. "This is the thing that will keep your team alive when everything else has gone wrong. It is the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, and if you do not respect it, if you do not learn it inside and out, People will die. The students leaned forward, hanging on every word. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of someone shifting in their seat. Locke picked up the firing pin, the same component she had explained to Selene months ago, and held it up to the light. "Let me tell you about a quarter-degree misalignment," she said, "and why it almost cost 16 lives." She began to teach, and as she spoke, she felt the last piece of herself click into place. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer erased from the records or forced to pretend she was something other than what she was. She was doing what she had always been meant to do, what her years of experience and hard-won knowledge had prepared her for. She was passing on the wisdom that had been earned in fire and darkness, making sure the next generation would be ready when their moment came. The students took notes frantically, trying to capture everything she said. But she knew that the real learning would not happen in this classroom. It would happen out on the flight line, when they had their hands on the actual weapons, when they could feel the mechanisms and hear the sounds, and develop the instincts that no textbook could teach. After the class, several students lingered, wanting to ask questions. A young airman named Torres approached first. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hesitant, "is it true that you landed a burning gunship with no pilot training?" Locke considered how to answer. The details of that mission were still partially classified, but enough had been declassified that she could discuss it in general terms. "I landed a damaged aircraft," she said carefully. "The pilot had been killed and the co-pilot was wounded. I had observed pilots enough to understand the basics, and the co-pilot was able to give me some guidance. But mostly it was about staying calm and focusing on the immediate task, not thinking about all the things that could go wrong, just dealing with each problem as it came." "Were you scared?" another student asked. Locke thought about that night, about the fire spreading through the cargo bay and the aircraft shuddering with damage. "Terrified," she said honestly. "But fear is not the problem. Fear is natural. The problem is letting fear control you, letting it stop you from doing what needs to be done. I was scared, but the people on the ground were counting on me, so I kept working. That is all any of us can do. Keep working through the fear." The students absorbed this, their young faces serious. They had signed up to serve, to be part of something larger than themselves, but they were only now beginning to understand what that really meant, what it would ask of them, what it might cost. Back at FOB Sentinel, life continued in its new configuration. The spray-painted words on the AC-130 had faded significantly in the harsh sun, but someone kept repainting them every few months. It had become an unofficial tradition, a way of honoring what had happened. New crew members arriving at the base heard the story and treated it with the reverence of legend, though the details often got exaggerated in the retelling. Selene had become one of the best weapons specialists in the squadron, known for catching problems no one else could see. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose issues, often identifying malfunctions before they fully manifested. When asked how she had learned to be so good, she always gave the same answer. "I had the best teacher." She kept a photo on her workbench, a picture of her and Locke standing beside the 105mm cannon, both of them wearing work gloves and serious expressions. It reminded her of what she was working toward, the standard she was trying to meet. She knew she would probably never be as good as Locke, but she could try. And in trying, she could honor what she had been taught. Ullman had been promoted to Master Sergeant and transferred to a command position at another base, responsible for overseeing multiple maintenance crews. He kept the photo of Locke standing beside the gunship on his desk, a reminder of the importance of really seeing the people in your command, of not overlooking someone just because they did not fit your expectations. He told the story often, using it as a teaching moment for the junior NCOs he was training. Rhett had submitted an application to become an instructor himself. Inspired by watching Locke teach, he figured that after 15 years of hands-on experience, he had knowledge worth passing on. The application was pending, but he was optimistic. He had included a letter of recommendation from Locke, who had written about his analytical skills and his willingness to question assumptions. Even Cobb had grown from the experience. He was more thoughtful now, more careful about the assumptions he made about people. He had taken Locke's advice to heart and focused on doing good work, becoming more reliable and conscientious. He still felt guilty sometimes about his initial comments, but he channeled that guilt into being better, into making sure he never made that mistake again. The challenge coin from the 16 stayed in Locke's pocket wherever she went. She carried it through training exercises and classroom lectures and quiet moments alone. It had become a talisman, a physical reminder that connected her to that night in Kandahar, to the men she had saved, to the person she had been when everything depended on her being perfect. She would take it out sometimes when she was alone, turning it over in her fingers, feeling its weight and texture. Each time she touched it, she remembered something different. The sound of the pilot's voice cutting out mid-sentence, the heat of the fire behind her, the steady rhythm of loading and firing over and over until the rhythm became everything. The relief in the SEAL team leader's voice when the backup finally arrived. She remembered, and in remembering, she honored not just the men she had saved, but also the person she had been that night. The person who had refused to quit, who had kept fighting when quitting, would have been easier and probably safer. That person was still inside her, she realized, still existed, had never truly gone away, just been hidden for a while. One evening, after a long day of instruction, Locke stood on the flight line at Hurlburt and watched an AC-130 taxi for a night mission. The engines roared, their deep thrumming sound vibrating through her chest. The gunship lifted into the darkening sky, its silhouette black against the fading light, and she felt a familiar tightness in her throat. She thought about all the missions she had flown, all the rounds she had fired, all the voices on the radio counting on her to be perfect when perfection was the only option. She thought about the nights over Afghanistan and Syria and other places whose names she could not say, watching the targeting computer and making the calculations that meant life or death for people she would never meet. She thought about the crew at FOB Sentinel who had learned to see her, who had taken someone invisible and made them matter again. She thought about the students in her classroom who looked at her like she had answers they desperately needed, who trusted her to prepare them for the realities of combat. And she realized that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not recognition, though that had its value, not medals, though they represented important acknowledgement, not her name in some official record, though having her service restored mattered more than she had expected, but purpose, belonging, a place where her skills mattered and her experience meant something, a reason to get up in the morning that went beyond just surviving another day. She was home. The gunship disappeared into the night, and Locke turned back toward the training building. Tomorrow, she would teach another class. She would show another group of young airmen how to keep their teams alive. She would pass on the lessons learned in missions that officially never happened, in moments when everything hung in the balance and one person's skill made all the difference. And somewhere out there, 16 men who owed their lives to a voice on the radio would go about their days, carrying the memory of someone who had refused to stop fighting. They would tell their children bedtime stories, never mentioning how close they had come to not being there. They would go to work, celebrate birthdays, argue about politics, do all the ordinary things that make up a life. And they would remember. Maybe not every day, maybe not in detail, but in those quiet moments when they thought about how different things might have been, they would remember the voice that had kept them alive. The death's head tattoo on Locke's shoulder, once a mark of something hidden and shameful, now represented what it had always meant to those who earned it, that some battles are fought in silence, that some heroes never make the headlines, that the most important work is often the work no one sees until the moment it saves their life. Rena Locke walked into the training building, ready for whatever came next. She had been erased from the records once, but she had been restored. She had been invisible, but now she was seen. She had lost herself in the shadows, but she had found her way back, to the light. And she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Years from now, some of her students would be the ones sitting in that gunship at night, making the same calculations she had made, keeping other teams alive through skill and determination. They would remember her lessons, the way she had taught them to see beyond the obvious, to trust their instincts, to never settle for good enough when lives were at stake. Some of them would face their own impossible moments, their own nights of fire and fear, and when they did, they would draw on what she had taught them. They would remember the woman who had refused to quit, who had kept firing when everyone else thought it was over, who had brought a dying aircraft home against impossible odds. They would remember, and they would be ready. And that, more than any medal or ceremony or official recognition, was the legacy that mattered. The knowledge passed from one generation to the next, the standards maintained, the lives saved by people who took their responsibilities seriously because someone had taught them what that meant. Locke settled into her office, A small space with a desk and filing cabinets and walls covered in technical diagrams. It was not much, but it was hers. She pulled out the challenge coin and set it on the desk where she could see it, a reminder of why she did this work. Then she opened her laptop and began preparing for tomorrow's class, planning the lesson that would teach another group of students how to be the person someone desperately needed them to be. Outside, the Florida night was warm and humid, so different from the desert where she had spent so many months hidden in plain sight. But the stars were the same stars, the aircraft were the same aircraft, and the work, the essential work of preparing people to do impossible things under terrible circumstances, that work continued. If this story reminded you that true service often goes unrecognized, if it made you think about someone in your life who gave everything without asking for anything in return, take a moment to honor them. Write their name in the comments. Tell their story, even if it is just a sentence or two. They deserve to be remembered. And if you believe these stories matter, if you think the unseen deserve their moment in the light, consider subscribing. Not because we are asking for your attention, but because there are more stories like this one waiting to be told. Stories about people who did extraordinary things and then went back to ordinary lives. People who changed the world without ever appearing in a headline. People like Rena Locke, who never asked for the spotlight but earned it 1,000 times over. Who showed us that the most capable heroes are often the ones we overlook. Who proved that recognition is not what makes someone worthy, but that being worthy is what makes recognition meaningful. The gunners will keep firing. The teachers will keep teaching. The quiet heroes will keep doing their work in the shadows and the light. And if we are lucky, if we pay attention, we will learn to see them before they have to prove themselves. We will honor their service before it becomes a story. We will recognize their worth not because someone pinned a medal on them, but because we have learned to look beyond the surface and see the person underneath. That is what Rena Locke taught the crew at FOB Sentinel. That is what she continues to teach her students at Hurlburt Field. That is what her story can teach all of us if we are willing to listen. See the unseen, honor the overlooked, remember the forgotten. Because somewhere, right now, there is someone doing extraordinary work that no one notices, someone keeping others safe, someone teaching the next generation, someone sacrificing in silence. They do not need our recognition to keep going, but they deserve it anyway. And maybe, just maybe, if we learn to see them sooner, we can save them from having to disappear in the first place.